Hello everyone. For this video now we're going to be going over the various settings that you might have for dealing with animation. There are settings and things to worry about down here with your timeline and all of this other stuff. There's also settings up with Windows settings, preferences. And I'm making this not just for us to learn about it right now this week, but also something that you could actually have as a point of reference going forward. So if we start off with, this is a file, it's this intro to animation file. I've got a couple things moving in here. Globe is spinning, gears are spinning, right? A few things going on. We have our timeline down here, and the red hash marks are anywhere that you have a key, but only for what's selected. Now, you can have multiple things selected, right? And so you would see this is the key for the gear. This is the key for the globe. There's keys for both objects in here. This is not going to be the place that we really work in for stuff. We're going to get to the graph editor a little bit this week and a lot more later. But that is where you would really get into changing your timing and things like that. But this is more like a visual. We can see what's going on. But how to change how long our timeline is, right? Like we're working now between 1 and 125 frames, which is great. Although it says here that we can go up to 208.33. Not sure what the 0.33 is standing for. But you have two numbers over here and two numbers over here. And then we have this. So the outside numbers are the full length of your animation. So if I change this to 250, there are 250 frames total in this animation. This lets me zoom in on a particular portion or zoom out to see the whole thing. So if I want to see all 250 frames, I drag this out here. If I want to zoom in on a very small portion, I can see here individual frames are now labeled 118, 119, 120, etc. These inside numbers are the part of the time slider that's visible. So if there's a discrepancy between these, that means there's animation, or at least a potential for animation, like off screen, as it were. So if you are animating something and you bring this back to the beginning of there, and you're looking at it and you're like, all right, I need to change like how this works, but then you can't see a key over here. You're like, where does it start? Where does the animation start? Well, it starts here in this dead zone that you're not seeing. If I click this and I drag it out, well, now I can see the first frame. So that's why these numbers are always visible, is because it wants to tell us, what's going on. These right here are script lines. So this is where you would type in scripts and various things. This is actually information that can tell you like tooltips and everything, and this is what actually happens. So if you displays the script editor basically. So we will eventually use this a little bit just to like troubleshoot things if things break. But right now we're kind of looking at this line and this line of stuff. Your play heads are over here, so you've got your play and stop. You can also play in reverse, not something we use very often. This with the red line right here is to go back and forth between keys. This can be important. You need to make sure you're on the same place as your key so that if you go to change it, it doesn't add a new key somewhere else. You have to be on your key. This goes forward one frame at a time, backwards one frame at a time, and then of course going to the beginning, going to the end. We weren't going to be worrying about these. This is your playback speed. So your number of frames per second. Or actually, no, I lied. It's not your number of frames per second. It's simply what this is playing back as. So in order to talk about this, though, I need to open up the main preferences. So I go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Preferences. And there's a lot going on in here. Under Settings, there's a few different things we maybe are going to be worrying about, even just for animation. There's animation, cached playback, time slider, and I think those are it. Although, by the way, undo. Make sure you're setting this to infinite. So right now we're going to start with the time slider. We're going to see the other two in a little bit. So the time slider, there's two different things. This is, I think, asking, I'm not sure if this is playback speed or, nope, this is the actual speed of the actual thing. So you have two different things going on. You have the actual speed at which the animation is, nope, wrong thing, is being processed. And then you have, preferences, here we go. You have, so that's what this is. This is your actual frame rate of your actual project. This is how fast you're watching it. Now, I know you might be thinking, why would I watch these at two different speeds? Well, sometimes if you're watching animation, you might need it to go at half speed. Or double speed. Maybe you're trying to get through it very fast and just kind of get an idea of like what the flow is, and it's kind of long, and you want to just get an idea of the order of operations. Sometimes we watch things at half speed because there's little details, and we're like, why does that look funny? Or watching interpenetration of like a foot into a floor, there's reasons to slow it down. Play every frame is something you might do if you're processing effects. Because if I say play at 24 frames a second, times 1, it's going to play it at that speed whether it has to drop frames or not. If you're on a slower computer, it might drop frames. Play every frame refers to, if you're doing effects, it needs to process every frame so you can see like the explosion or the fire or the smoke. And then you can tell it to don't go faster than 24 frames a second. But for us, for animation, we need to know the speed. And if it drops a few frames in order to play at the right speed, for our purposes, that might be better because you'll know it's dropping frames, but you might not know if it's slowing down or speeding up. So we're going to keep our playback speed at 24 frames a second. Looping, you can tell it to either loop continuously, which is also what this button is right here, or you can tell it to go back and forth. I don't know why you would do that. Or you can tell it to just play once, and it won't keep playing ad infinitum, but it'll stop. There are some settings in here in terms of how big the key ticks, that's what this is, how big they're going to be. There's also an interesting thing right here. It says time code on time marker and play range. So what that will do is you can see right here, it's added this 0.00001. It basically is translating your frames into seconds for here too. And so what that can tell me is that at 100 frames, I'm at 4 seconds, 4 frames. The first set of zeros is hours, then minutes, then seconds, then frames, like excess frames in between the seconds. So for those of you who may not be able to do a whole bunch of math on the fly and remember that 120 frames is at 24 frames a second is 5 seconds, that's okay. So we can tell our time marker to tell us how many seconds there is so we can think in terms of stuff we understand a little bit more intuitively. All right, and then it's the same thing for this down here, so you can know how many seconds of animation you're not seeing on one end or the other. So those are your time playback settings. So these are for what you're seeing here and how you're interacting with it. But none of this is actually, well, except for the frame rate for the general thing, none of this is changing your actual animation. So one of the things you may notice is that for both these sets of animations, they start slow, speed up, and then slow down again. Now I'm going to show you this in the graph editor, where graph editor is another video, but if you go to Window, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, that is what you're looking at. This is a graph of the animation. We're going to be living in this semester, but you can see it's a shallow, curve, steeper curve, shallow curve again. Slow down, speed up, speed up, going fast, slow down. And when there's no motion, there's no keys, there's no animation. It did that automatically. It did that by default. What if we did not want that to happen by default? Windows, animation, nope, sorry, settings, preferences. And then under animation, there are a few settings in here that we should change. One of them, for example, non-weighted tangents. No, we want weighted tangents. That one you should change irrespective of what assignment we're working on. We basically always want weighted tangents. Weighted tangents are going to allow us to change things in our graph editor. Then there's the default in and out. We're going to learn about all of these later, but for our purposes with like the gears spinning or the globe moving, if we want things to be continuous, if we don't want them to speed up and slow down, we would say, I believe it is linear for both of them. Yeah. And if we say linear, then the next thing that we move, if I put this here, and that's the, let's see, translate X. So if I key that selected, and then I move this over here, and I move this over here, and then I right click, key selected, there should be no speeding up or slowing down. It's hard to tell because I moved it really slowly. But see how it just stops dead? Those are linear curves. And that curve in the graph editor, see how it's flat? It's just a straight, oh, yikes. Hold on. There it is. See how that's just a line? There's no curve to it. That's what linear tangents do. So whether you have them as flat or clamped or spline or linears, depending on what we're doing, we have an assignment this week that is going to need linear tangents. So when we get to the start of the assignment, I'm saying linear tangents to start. It affects everything going forward. It does not change the other things. You will notice that they still speed up and slow down. So if you didn't have your settings right the first time, went, oh no, I need to change it. That'll be another video. It'll be the next one called Graph Editor, but there's another way to change it after the fact, but this is how you would change it beforehand. Generally speaking, linear is the exception, and clamped will be the rule, or flat. Sorry, not clamped, flat. And these types of tangents, changing them, for the most part, you're going to change them after the fact anyways, but flat is a good place to start usually. Linear is a good place to start sometimes.